Welcome back to my Less Stress, More Zest podcast. Each month, I focus on a theme that connects the challenges, struggles, and experiences from my clients, members of my community, and my lived experience. It's June 2026, and this month, I'm putting the spotlight on anxiety, which is commonplace in adults of emotionally immature parents. I imagine that there's going to be some of you today, some of the listeners who probably have never actually related the environment that they grew up in with the anxiety that they're experiencing as an adult. And there's probably some of you smirking right now because you recognize this pattern a long time ago, either within yourself or perhaps somebody else. So once again, welcome everyone. My name is Nicholas Dobb. I'm a trauma therapist and resilience coach, and I'm the founder of Zest Quest. Joining me today is the lovely Leanne James from Lotus Energies, who's a coach, counselor, and energy practitioner. Leanne, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, and always a pleasure to have conversations of these sorts of topics with you, Nicholas, and we do that regularly. And this is such an important topic, isn't it? Emotionally unavailable, emotionally immature adults, parents in particular is this topic. So, but before we dive in, just explain why now? Why this particular topic? Why now?
That's easy. I get clients who come to me and they say, "Hey, I've got anxiety, full stop." And they think that's enough. They think that it's just, they might share a few of their circumstances that are happening currently. And as we start to explore and understand where their anxiety, that I can see these specific origins. It's always in their childhood. And that these types of clients have built a map. They built a set of strategies to work from, to get by in life, and no one's connected the dots for them before, and they haven't connected the dots themselves to recognize that, oh, that's how I grew up, and that's why I've got anxiety now as an adult. So what they've been doing is managing their own symptoms or going to see some other type of therapist to manage the symptoms for them.
Yeah, there's a lot of anxiety disorder labels, isn't there? And it's a pretty bold claim to explain that it isn't the way they're supposed to be, and there's another alternative. So, tell us a little bit more about where people believe it's a disorder, but it might not be.
Well, there's certainly anxiety disorders that have been diagnosed, and I'm not foolish enough to dismiss the neuroscience and the neurobiology behind things. There are chemical behaviors in the brain, that there's patterning that happens there. But what I see in a lot of what's happening out there in the mainstream is that they're attributing only genetics and only brain chemistry to someone's anxiety. And that becomes a dominant narrative. And what I like to do is look at, where did this pattern begin? So not just recognize the anxiety and the symptoms of it, and maybe some of the current triggers to it, but where did it begin? And there's a lot of research around this. There's some great names out there like Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate that are looking at developmental relationships. There's also a quite a famous study, the ACE study, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And what they're doing, they're linking childhood experiences to, well, the root cause of adult anxiety, and that they're recognizing where it began, sometimes overtly and a lot of the times not. So anxiety, from my perspective, is not just something to be managed as a disorder, but look at those things, look at the symptoms, and how can we get underneath and actually heal things from the source? And that's a different conversation.
Yeah, true. So, like you referred to having emotionally immature parents, and like I'm a parent, it sounds a bit harsh to be hearing that sort of thing. I wouldn't like to be considered as emotionally immature, but when I think about it, there's a lot of experiences that I've had in the years gone by, isn't there? And so, but most parents, I think, really believe that they're doing their very best. So, can you explain more about what that phrase actually means? The emotionally immature parent. What is that?
Yeah, absolutely, Leanne. It's a fair challenge too. An important distinction here is we're not trying to make out that these parents are bad people. We don't want to villainize them and punish them. That's just inappropriate. However, we are looking at what is an emotionally immature parent and the impacts to those children. Um, Certainly, I can recognize that most parents, they love their children, they care about them. They're trying to do their best, but some of them, they actually just lack the capacity. They don't have the emotional capacity. They don't have the emotional maturity that a child requires. And children have needs. Just the same as we need to feed and clothe them, they have emotional needs. So, well, you might be asking, or some people might be asking, what does an emotionally immature parent look like? How can I spot them? And well, let's just look at some of their behaviors and traits. And I think there'll be some things that people can identify with.
Yeah.
Quite often, I see those parents that their mood dominates the entire household, and so if that parent isn't coping, everybody in the household knows because they have to monitor and or adjust for that parent. They typically have low empathy. They're dismissive of a child's emotions, of a child's inner workings, and play it down and say, don't be a crybaby, get over it.
Mm. Seen that.
A lot of emotionally immature parents can be extremely reactive. That the minus thing, and you get this huge reaction that's disproportionate to what actually has happened. They don't have a healthy ability to own their stuff, to apologize. They defend, they deny, they distract, they do all those things, deflecting away from what's happened. So if someone calls them out on it, it's not their fault. They'll always have someone else to blame.
Mm, true.
There's a rigidity about a lot of these parents. They see things in very black and white perspectives, and they expect people to agree with them. They don't even want to recognize the other side. Um, Things become one-sided. A conversation always somehow comes back to that parent. That if a child had a tough day at school, for instance, it ends up being the tough day that the adult that parent had. Boundaries, and I love talking about boundaries because I think they impact us and a gateway to having more joy in life. Blurred boundaries by the emotionally immature parent. They can be super rigid in areas that they shouldn't be. And they can be super porous or weak in other areas that they shouldn't be like that there. And they don't find this healthy middle ground and healthy boundaries. And therefore they don't teach their children about healthy boundaries. So it might be the parent who overshares and starts talking about things that they shouldn't be talking about, or they're prying, they're pushing their way into the children's lives where they should just allow a child to have some of those experiences and grow. And finally, I think one that a lot of people I know relate to is they say their parents are physically present, but they're detached. They're just not really there, and they're not showing emotions or caring.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen elements of that too in people that I've spoken with, and you said something just a little moment ago, talking about boundaries, talking about black and white thinking and behaviors, and it makes me think of that little phrase as growing up, black and white and black or white or red all over, and oh yeah, that's true. Those real extremes that you see in some family homes and personalities, and there's this rage that comes from the parents or the children not knowing, and so there's this discomfort. And but the emotionally detached, or emotionally incapable, that's like another level. That's like an, I guess, an ignorance or an inability or lack of understanding. How does this affect the children though? Like, we're talking about, that on the effect of the adults on the children. So what's going on for the kids? What happens
Sure.
there?
And after all, that's what this podcast is about today. We're talking about those children who are now adults.
Yeah,
So let's explore this in two parts. Firstly,
sure.
every child intrinsically seeks to be nurtured and to be loved. And through that, they'll feel safe and secure. They'll feel like they belong and are part of a family. And underneath that, they know that they can't survive. A
Mm,
4-year old just intuitively knows they can't survive on their own. Secondly, some of the behaviors that they adopt, that these children adopt, we're talking about, is that's so they can cope and survive because they're looking to find some peace or calm. They're looking at ways to mitigate the chaos and just survive. So they accommodate to make to maintain the peace. They compromise themselves. So they're self-sacrificing, putting their own needs last because it's more important to, well, look after mum or dad, whoever it may be. And that way, their parent might still be calm with them. They find a hyper independence. These children can cope on their own because they've kind of not really had a choice to do otherwise. And so they suppress their feelings of wanting to be supported and find ways to do things themselves. They've got a chronic self-doubt, forever self second guessing and self-reflecting of, will I do this right? Will I do it wrong? And they don't really know because they haven't had good role models and they haven't been encouraged. And when they did think they're doing something right, that's when the parents switched the game and they found out it didn't work.
Mm.
And experts at conflict avoidance, because that was a lot of their safety. So if they could prevent arguments, they went out of their way to prevent arguments. It wasn't a case of being right or wrong. It was just a case of keeping the calm. So look at those sorts of things as being the science stuff.
Yeah.
Now let's have a quick glimpse into how does it play out for those children.
Yeah.
Well, they walk through the front door. Maybe they've come home from school and they're reading the emotional temperature of the home before they've even said hello, or if they should say hello. They're listening for footsteps. They're listening for other cues that might indicate something's going well in the house or not going so well. Um, they know the silence of calm and the silence of chaos is about to hit the fan.
Yeah.
They're experts at reading the room and they know the emotional temperature of a room. They're intuitively, scanning faces. They can pick up the micro twitch, the movement of eyes that indicate that something's about to happen
Yeah.
or has happened. They respond to the tone of a voice and they know that their responses, they learn responses to minimize reactions. And with all of this, one of the saddest things that I feel and witness is that these children are suppressing emotions. They're expressing things that they want to talk about. They're suppressing how they want to react. They can't be upset. They can't be too happy. They can't ask for something. And they're suppressing all of this. So they're suppressing having fun and just being a child.
Yeah. Poor little ones, hey.
Hmm.
And yet those little ones grow up to be adults that are also still suppressing the ability to speak and the ability to have fun, but they're adults now. And that anxiety within must continually play out then as adults in their relationships and as parents, I imagine. So you did refer to, and we've been talking about emotionally immature parents, and it does sound a bit harsh. And we're not attacking them. Obviously, you're not trying to point the finger or blame or anything like that. Um, because some of those parents just don't have the capacity. So, from my experience, a lot of this is just really subtle. It's not very obvious. They're just in the background. We don't even really notice. So, tell us more about that subtlety and what's going on for those adult children.
Thanks, Leanne. Yeah, it can be really subtle and usually is. That is the norm. And, once again, just to be clear, even though we're identifying that they've had emotionally immature parents growing up, this isn't about apportioning blame, but it's what we're doing today is creating some understanding and some awareness. And those parents, they're not bad people. They simply just couldn't show up well the way they needed to show up. They didn't have the capacity. And now, I think you used the word ignorance earlier, and I kind of felt into that. And I wouldn't say it's ignorance, it's because they just don't know any better. They haven't, they're not ignoring something, but they don't know how to do it better. And a lot of them, if not most, if not all, have their own unresolved issues, quite often from when they were growing up. There's a psychologist, Lindsay Gibson, who wrote a book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, ties into today. And she points out a couple of things that these parents are too focused on their own inner world, their own inner survival, to be consistently available and responsive to their children and the children's emotional needs. And what she further goes on to point out is that these parents aren't malicious, they're not deliberately trying to hurt their children or ignore their children and withhold the emotions that the children are seeking, but they're just limited. They don't have the capacity. And these are the things that a child requires.
Yeah. Yeah. Poor little things, hey. And the little ones don't know the subtleties of what the adults around them are actually portraying and struggling to just survive, as you've said numerous times. And but what can we do with the adults and the subtlety and how does that come through with their new growth and learning about overcoming this emotional immaturity as a parent?
Um, well, just picking up on you've used the word subtle and the subtlety of what they're experiencing, and that's what makes this really challenging. That these emotional wounds that these children are experiencing insidious. They've just developed over time, subtly, gently, and there's not a single event where dad hit me and hurt me that I can point to and say, yes, it was at that moment. It's these things that have been happening over a long period of time. And the home environment wasn't terrible. Like I shared earlier, that these adults that come to me as clients are saying, but I had a good upbringing. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so it's what we end up identifying that just because many things were right doesn't mean that there weren't some things that were absent. And those things that were absent have had the impact.
Right.
Um, so yeah, those clients that said, yeah, but my parents, oh, they cared for me. They weren't abusive. We went on holidays. I had food and education and all those sorts of things. We went on holidays. I got gifts and all that sort of thing. That's great. And that contributes a lot to a person's upbringing. However, if they need something deeper and the parent or parents are not supplying that, then there's an absence in that child's needs and they need the emotional attunement. They need the nurturing. They need to be seen and heard. That's just intrinsic to us. And when there's that absence, then the child, well, they develop coping strategies and their nervous system locks this in. It's something that sticks with them.
Mm. Yeah, their nervous system's kind of got a record of that now, haven't they? Hasn't it? And as children that have grown up with this sort of anxiety and inbuilt, you know, anxiety, let me just use that word. It's a pretty good word, right? We all, I think, understand what that word means. And someone experiencing that as an adult for, 20, 30, 40 years, um, and maybe there's no way to go back to when they were little or back to where they grew up and with their parents and any of those relationships. But how do they translate that anxiety now as adults? What can they do about that?
Yeah, well, for some people, and you may even be hearing about this for the first time, that as you're growing up, as you're learning and creating your identity and understanding the world, that your nervous system had a job. And that was to keep you safe, to keep you alive. And in a dysfunctional household, it was don't get caught off guard. So the child learns to listen carefully, to watch every move, to stay low and out of trouble. And and the behaviors continue. And what I see is some of these children, now adults, they're the ones that have been had really good behavior. They're well behaved in school, and now they're really well behaved in their career, and they're really well behaved in society, and that's admirable. But it's because they were just trying to stay out of trouble for safety. And so they also learned, some of them, to try harder. They're the workaholics, they're the perfectionists, and they've also learnt to preempt that things could go wrong. So develop a hyper alertness, hyper vigilance to make sure things don't go wrong. And the key point to answer your question now, Leanne, is that this isn't a personality trait. This isn't just who a person is, but they're behaviors and strategies that the children have learnt, developed, and locked into place. And the important thing is that they can change. It's like a computer program in your operating system. So we can change that programming to have something better, to have something healthier. And then by that change, then it allows that person to have more freedom in life, more growth. And just thinking back now that for some of those people, it's like they've left home, they've become adults and maybe have a family and successful careers, but their nervous system never grew up with it.
Oh,
They
yeah.
didn't realize that the programs change and the environments change. So they're still on alert and they're still programmed for danger and being anxious.
Yeah, still fighting for something and not even really aware of what that is because that thing left when they left.
Yep,
But
the threats
they're
moved
still,
on, but the program didn't.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly right. Wow. Can you surely, with all your different clients that you've had, can tap into someone, a client, no names, just to give us an example of how that translates into a person's experience.
Yeah, I worked with a woman, and I'll call her Sarah today just to protect her identity. And Sarah came to me and she said, I think I'm just someone who worries a lot. I think that's just part of who I am. And, but that's okay. And she kind of dismissed it. And we explored this. And Sarah, she was high functioning. She has successful career, family. She's doing life really well on so many aspects if you're just looking from the outside. But she was living with a constant, what I say is the hum of dread, the hum of what's going to go wrong, sitting in the background. And it's constant for her. Sometimes she'd lie awake at night, wondering what terrible thing was going to happen. And as we did the deeper work, and Sarah got to explore, and we all explored this together, we realized that for Sarah, that she created this picture of a childhood of a mother who was what I call stormy. And when the storm had abated and things were calm, when things were good in the house, well, it was generally okay. But when the storm was volatile, then it was disruptive for everyone in the whole household. And so when mum struggled, everyone in the household struggled. And unfortunately, it was a little bit too often. So Sarah learnt from a young age that she had to manage her mother, that she had to parent her mother in some ways to help keep the calm. And she's still doing it in her relationships, in her family, in her career. She's still got those behaviors playing out. Steps into a meeting room, she's scanning the room, she's feeling the emotional temperature, and she's also thinking, what could go wrong? So
Mm.
she's bracing for trouble. As we continued to work and we did the work at the right level, so we got down to the subconscious and where the programming that I mentioned is held. We healed some of the emotional wounding that Sarah has, and we got to the source of what was happening. And so her anxiety has dissipated incredibly. She doesn't live with anxiety anymore. She just experiences it now and then as a
Mm.
regular, healthy adult. So she no longer has to manage what her anxiety has been for years, for decades, in fact.
Yeah.
She has a new operating system, new programming happening, and because we got that at the source, so she's no longer being triggered, and the difference is incredible, and it reflects in her face. She looks younger than when she walked in. It's really quite magnificent.
That's amazing. It's really good to know that there's that we aren't broken, that we need to be fixed, and we weren't created like that, were we? So we didn't come into the world with all this anxiety around us, inside us, and completely consuming us, and that we can make peace with certain things. Of course, there's part of society that's just wanting to have us accept this as being normal.
Yes.
Um, and to to accept anxiety as being normal and like stuff it away, like push it down, like just have that nervous system still operating without actually getting to the root cause and removing, as you say, the root of why they became an anxious little person that grew up to be an anxious big person. So, there's some of these people, I guess, they're blaming the parents, but sometimes the parents have experienced similar things themselves, I dare say. So tell us about that. What do you feel about that acceptance of anxiety?
Sure. So, as you say, there's an acceptance movement. It's been around for a number of years, and uh, when it's done well and for healthy individuals, it's life changing. In fact, to have that healthy acceptance of things within myself and within other people and circumstances. However, some of the acceptance movement, well, in my opinion, they're not doing it well. It's limited and it can, in fact, be dangerous because there's a version of what I'll, inverted commas, go radical acceptance, the unhealthy version. And it's just like it's a really sophisticated way of not addressing what the real problems are, not getting it down to the source. And so what happens is there's supposed to be the acceptance, and we'll just put that off to the side. Yet those people still have to manage the symptoms of their anxiety. And that continual managing of symptoms, it's absolutely exhausting.
Mm, mm, mm,
If you reflect on when you're anxious or trying to deal with, some level of uncertainty, there's always energy being burnt. And if it's constant, it's exhausting.
mm.
So it's important to have healthy acceptance and to use that knowledge to work out, the things that you can change and the things that you can't. And always it's having a look internally, not fighting with yourself, um, but acknowledging that the anxiety exists and that they have been developed for a lot of people as a survival strategy. And rather than accepting it as part of your personality, is recognize it as a part that can be changed for something better. And that's a message I want everyone to recognize that change is possible.
Lovely.
And so this awareness is having a deeper understanding that then gives people something they can work with. And where people and clients sometimes come in with angst against their parents, we don't want to go have that creating a rift, or maybe there's already a rift. But as people heal and as they accept um, the parts within themselves that they can accept, when they make the changes that they can change within themselves, what I see happens is relationships change and they find a compassion towards their parents. In fact, their relationships with a lot of people, their relationships with their parents improve. And it's not just those relationships, it spirals out in all directions.
Yes, I agree completely. I see it. I've experienced that. I know that's a truth, definitely. So, but surely there must be those people you come across that say they've generally had a really good childhood. They've got supportive parents, they went on holidays, no obvious big issues. There must have been some subtleties in there somewhere that have caused them to have these anxieties. But how does it apply to them? How does it apply to those who've had generally good childhoods?
Yeah, great point, Leanne. Thanks. For a lot of people, and I position myself as a trauma therapist, and I talk to people, I hear things in conversation as well as what's happening out there in the marketplace. And for a lot of people, they only view trauma as something big, that they've been in this major accident or they've had experienced some sort of abuse or been in a war environment and different things. And they only see trauma as big stuff. And that's part of the problem because trauma, uh, it can be benign. It can seemingly be inconsequential. And the likes of Gabor Mate are great for this because he talks about developmental trauma. And what he identifies is that people experience a consistent environment that they grew up with where they weren't ignored on the whole, but they were emotionally ignored. There was an emotional abandonment and various things like that, and they have a lasting effect. So even though a parent in many ways, and please let's acknowledge them, they're kind and loving and hardworking. There's also part of those same parents who are emotionally unavailable and just don't have the tools and mechanisms to support a child. And with that, the child feels unsafe. They feel unheard. And a part of them, they might feel literally abandoned, even within the loving environment. So the parents are coping with their own world, and this doesn't allow room for the children's world. And that child is looking for something, craving something internally, even if they don't know at that point what it is. So good intentions from a parent don't automatically equate to a healthy outcome. They don't produce emotional safety. And so it's what the child experiences and interprets that counts.
Yeah, true, true. There's a lot of generational stuff talk we're tipping into here, isn't there? And you know
Certainly.
what we've been delivered and handed, and what we pick up and take with us, and then what we interpret. Wow, there's so much that you've offered, and only just dipping our toe in these topics, aren't we? Like, I know you always love to give takeaways. You like to, deliver some goods at the end and some gems. That so, if you had a couple of things that you could recommend as the key things from today, what would you suggest? What do you want people to start thinking about, or yeah, or doing?
Yeah, well, probably just even what we've talked about is going to be stimulating processing and thoughts.
Yeah.
Uh, a couple of tips though, and think of these as starting points. They're not going to be the whole solution. These are just, if you're beginning this journey, here's a couple of starting points. And tip number one is identify and name the pattern. So rather than just experiencing anxiety, start to name it. Oh, I'm feeling anxious. And just saying you feel anxious actually isn't enough. We need to break that down a little bit. And when we say, or when I say, how do you feel? I'm looking for two things. What are the emotions? So when you have anxiety, are there other emotions? Because there generally will be.
Mm.
Look for those other emotions. There might be a little bit of fear. There might be a little bit of uncertainty. There might be a little bit of frustration. Dig in, find out what those other emotions are. And the other part of feeling is what are the body sensations? So where in the body do you notice your anxiety? Is it something in the stomach? Leanne's pointing to her throat. Is that point where you just can't express yourself? In fact, maybe you can't get any words out at all, or if you do, they're not going to sound right. Is it the pain in the neck? Wherever else, people experience it in their body. Whenever there's emotions, there's also physical sensation. So start to get in tune with that. And as you do that, and here's the key part to this tip is, I guess if you like, part one of tip one is identifying, naming, and part two is recognizing what of this relates to past, what of this relates to things that you've experienced before, and what is simply the present experience. And when you can start to differentiate past and present, when you can go, okay, my past emotions are experienced, my present experience, then you start to get a deeper understanding. Tip number two, get curious about your childhood rules. I'm just going to repeat that. Get curious about your childhood rules. And I heard Leanne, without speaking, she said, what do you mean? You probably grew up with some very clear rules in your house of what mum or dad put into place. And I'm not talking about those, although they are relevant as well. It's what are the childhood rules you put into place? Those unspoken rules that you set up for yourself. Don't make a fuss. Think of somebody else or everybody else instead of yourself.
Mm.
That my feelings are inconvenient because I know when I tried to express my feelings when I was little that, well, it backfired and I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel heard. In fact, I might have even felt punished. And the other thing is that if I want to do something for myself, if I want to be myself, that's being selfish. And that could be a rule that you grew up with, that you self-imposed. So get curious about your own childhood rules, the ones that you imposed upon yourself. As we start to get towards wrapping this podcast up, I invite you, if any of this has landed for you and you're relating to it, if you're recognizing yourself in this, don't sit on that. Don't dismiss it because, there's the pattern of dismissing yourself and one of those rules of think of other people, put yourself last, all those sorts of things. Don't dismiss it. Act on it. Because I know that doing the work on these sorts of things, it works. I use TRTP as one of my key modalities in therapy. TRTP stands for the Richards Trauma Process, and it works with the subconscious. It works with where these emotional wounds are stored in the body, in the mind, and releasing the triggers from those. So when we've got those events, that we can wrap them up from eras gone by and move forward. And if you're not sure, or you're curious, or you actually have a direct question you want to ask, contact me, reach out. Let's have a conversation. I offer free sessions. You can book that online and it's available there for you, and you can see if I'm the right fit.
Amazing. You got to do it. Like I have heard so much of what you said today, and I would recommend that the listeners even go back and listen to it again and write things down, write some key things that are really, coming to front of mind. They're feeling and they're resonating with those ideas, and then book in a call, check your website out, book in that rapport call with you, and see, yes, if you're right fit, of course, but also to see where they want to go, what their outcome might be in their life, and how to bring so much more joy in their world. And this is what you're talking about. This is going to be able to release a lot of that stuck energy and old
Mm.
beliefs there. That's fabulous. Like, I love this. Thanks so much, Nicholas, for inviting me here to have this conversation with you today, to help all of your audience to feel that they've got more hope, and hope for resilience and confidence and all those good things, all the juicy goodness. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you, Leanne. And before we go, I just want to recognize that these sorts of conversations, they can stir up your inner critic, and that if you've been carrying anxiety for a long time, if there's that background hum, the constant hypervigilance and the exhaustion of being anxious, that this isn't a flaw or a fault in who you are. This isn't just a personality trait. But I want you to consider this. You were resourceful, you were creative, you had resilience, and you took on these strategies to cope, to get on with life, to create calm so you could survive. And you did a great job. And so you weren't weak in doing that. You're not weak now. You're not faulty. But I would invite you to say, is it time to move on? Is it to say those patterns and behaviors, it's time to be end of an era, to let your nervous system know that you've left home, you no longer need them? And you don't need to fight for this. You don't need to keep managing your symptoms. You can put down that anxiety. And I'm talking about the anxiety is never yours to carry. Because I look at this, you're magnificent. And my wish for you is to have less stress, more zest, and enjoy life. So, Leanne, thank you. I really appreciate your presence. And you've thrown a couple of curly questions at me, which is always fun. Looking forward to do it again sometime.
Thanks, Nicholas.
Bye, everyone.